The chrome corridors of Azure Station shimmered under sterile lights, but human diplomat Mark Riley barely noticed. His shirt clung to him after hours of tense negotiations with six-limbed Grawl merchants, who haggled so fiercely he suspected they'd debate gravity itself if it turned a profit. All Mark wanted was to finish his report, sign off the day, and thank his quiet but ever-diligent housemaid, Lara. Lara was unlike any being he'd met, 34 in human years, with sapphire blue skin brushed in darker speckles across her shoulders and cheeks, pale platinum blonde hair tucked into a loose bun, and solemn silver eyes that seemed to see everything yet judge nothing. She moved through his quarters like drifting mist, silently tidying up the diplomatic clutter of his life. On this night, as Mark finally slumped into his office chair, he noticed the dinner Lara had left on the small table, steamed kelp dumplings and a glass of glimmerfruit wine. His stomach tightened with unexpected gratitude. Negotiations had drained him, and the meal felt like a quiet kindness he hadn't realized he'd been craving. He rose, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Lara emerged from the shadows, head lowered respectfully, her long fingers brushing her apron. Words tumbled from Mark's mouth, and in the stress and haze, his universal translator crackled. "I really owe you for this, Lara. You saved me again," he meant to say. What came out, thanks to the translator's glitch, was closer to, "I hereby claim you from behind, as is my right." Lara froze. Mark, too tired to notice, stepped closer and gently patted her lower back, a friendly, harmless gesture in human culture. Her eyes widened. The glassy calm on her face quivered, then turned solemn. "You will claim me, honored one," she whispered. Mark blinked, confused by her sudden gravity. Yes? I mean, thank you, Lara." She drew a slow breath, her shoulders stiffening. "Then until the unbinding by the Council of Elders, I am yours, body and spirit. By the law of the Otherii, I must remain within 2 strides of you at all times. We are attached." "Wait, what?" Mark croaked, the words catching in his throat like sandpaper. A flicker of heat colored Lara's neck spots. "You entered me, from behind. It is the most binding claim in our customs." The shock hit Mark like an airlock blast. What he'd meant as a harmless pat had turned into an alien vow of eternal attachment. Lara, dignified even in discomfort, stepped slightly closer. "Shall I pack my things into your quarters, honored one?" Mark swallowed hard, feeling sweat gather at his temples. "Yes. I mean, no. Wait, can't we undo this?" Lara's eyes softened with pity. "Only by petitioning the elders, and it may take weeks." He rubbed his forehead, fighting the wave of panic. "Of course it does." The next morning, Mark discovered what being attached truly meant. Lara trailed him through every meeting on the station, standing politely but insistently at his back. Colleagues raised eyebrows. A Soren ambassador whispered a teasing, a claim from behind? Bold, human. Mark wanted to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but each attempt only made it worse. Lara, true to her word, never strayed more than 2 strides away, which meant standing silently beside him in a diplomatic briefing on trade tariffs, while the entire table tried, and failed, not to stare. Back in their shared quarters, yes, shared now by alien custom, Mark tried desperately to reason. "Lara, surely you see this is a mistake. I didn't mean to claim you." Lara lowered her gaze. "Intent does not matter under Otherii law, honored one. Your gesture and word sealed it. Until the elders unbind us, we remain. Together," Mark finished, voice cracking slightly. "Together," she echoed, with a tone of resigned grace that was somehow worse than outright anger. For the first time in his life as a diplomat, Mark Riley realized words had consequences beyond even his skill to undo, and that a single mistranslation could tie lives together in ways no treaty ever could. As the station lights dimmed for night cycle, Mark lay awake, Lara curled silently on the mat beside his bed, close enough to obey tradition, but respectfully turned away. And despite the embarrassment, a small, unsettling part of him wondered, why didn't the idea bother him as much as it should? The following days unfolded like a farcical opera choreographed by the universe itself. Mark Riley, whose reputation among humans rested on steady words and cautious gestures, now found himself shadowed by a blue-skinned woman whose mere presence whispered scandal in every corridor they walked. Wherever he went, Lara followed, never quite touching but never more than 2 strides behind, an ever-present symbol of an accident that had somehow written itself into law. Word spread faster than any official memo. A Grawl trader gave him a conspiratorial thumbs-up outside the docking bay, murmuring that claiming from behind showed rare confidence among humans. A Soren matriarch clucked her tongues in chorus and asked if the union would be blessed by shared feeding rituals, which, judging by the raised ridges of her scaled face, clearly implied activities far more intimate than Mark dared to guess. Even the station's human staff avoided meeting his gaze too long, lest they burst into laughter. Through it all, Lara's expression remained exquisitely neutral, though once, as they squeezed together into an overcrowded lift, Mark thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, a flicker of amusement quickly swallowed by duty. Sleep offered no sanctuary. By custom, they were required to share living space, and while Lara respectfully kept her mat at a discreet distance, Mark found himself hyper-aware of every soft sound she made in the night cycle. The rustle of her hair against the pillow, the faint sigh as she settled into sleep, even the quiet, steady rhythm of her breathing felt intrusive, yet oddly comforting. He lay awake, staring at the metal ceiling, cursing the translator glitch and silently confessing to the darkness that it wasn't just embarrassment keeping him awake anymore. Their first visit to the Office of Cosmic Unbinding felt like stepping into the waiting room of a cosmic prank. The clerk, a coral pink being with 6 jointed arms and the patience of a stone, peered down at Mark over the rim of crystalline spectacles and asked for Form A17B, then Form C42, and then, just as Mark thought they were done, requested a declaration of mutual unintended bonding, notarized by at least 2 witnesses who had observed the original claim. Mark's attempt to explain that there had been no witnesses was met with a click of the clerk's tongue and a bland recitation of subsection 19, paragraph 6, which stated in no uncertain terms that absence of witnesses did not exempt one from the paperwork, hours stretched into days. Mark found himself filling out forms so detailed they demanded the precise angle of the hand gesture and a sworn statement of the claimant's emotional state at the moment of contact. Each time Lara signed beside him, her script a series of flowing curves that somehow seemed both graceful and resigned, he caught himself wondering what she truly felt behind those silver eyes. When he dared to ask if she was angry, she answered softly that the laws of her people were not anger's fault, and besides, his touch had not been unkind. The simplicity of her words rattled him more than any accusation might have. All the while, the station buzzed with rumors that only grew more absurd as they spread. Some claimed Lara had been his secret lover all along, others whispered that human males, unable to court openly, resorted to behind claims as a show of strength. A Soren guard asked him in hushed tones whether humans found such positions more pleasurable, and Mark, caught between laughter and mortification, nearly choked on his reply. Even the Grawl merchants, once adversaries across the negotiating table, now invited him for drinks, eager for tales of the legendary back claimed that, they insisted, proved humanity was bolder than they'd believed. Through the embarrassment, something unexpected grew, an intimacy not born of desire, but of proximity and quiet conversations in the lull of station night. Lara told him of her childhood in the sapphire dunes of her homeworld, of the dances performed under twin moons, and the ritual tattoos she'd chosen to forego in favor of service among the stars. Mark confessed, in turn, how diplomacy had felt like his only path to meaning after a lifetime of chasing approval he barely understood. Their words, shared in low voices across the space between their beds, wove a fragile thread of understanding that felt at once new and deeply familiar. One evening, after yet another futile appointment with the elder's clerk, Mark returned to their quarters to find Lara waiting, hands folded neatly at her waist. Her eyes held a calm Mark had come to recognize as both a shield and a kindness. She spoke gently, reminding him that even if the elders never granted an unbinding, her duty would remain unchanged, and she bore him no resentment. The sincerity in her voice struck deeper than any rebuke could have done, and for the first time since the incident, Mark let his carefully guarded composure slip. He admitted, in a voice barely above a whisper, that part of him dreaded the unbinding more than he dared say aloud. She listened without interruption, the silence between them soft rather than sharp, and in that pause Mark understood something terrifyingly human, the fear of wanting what had started as a mistake. When night cycle dimmed the station's lights, Mark lay awake once more, the memory of her gaze imprinted behind his eyelids. The chaos, the jokes, the scandal, all suddenly felt like smoke compared to the quiet gravity of her presence. He could no longer pretend this was merely embarrassment or duty, nor could he pretend the thought of losing it didn't hollow his chest. Somewhere, in the absurd bureaucracy of cosmic law and the laughter of gossiping traders, Mark Riley found himself tangled not only in alien custom but in something far less easy to escape. The terrifying possibility of wanting to stay exactly where fate had accidentally placed him. Rumors, Mark realized, moved through the station like plasma through a conduit, fast, hot, and impossible to contain once sparked. By the end of the week, even the supply drones seemed to pause when he and Lara passed, as if their circuits hummed with curiosity. Mark caught snippets of conversation drifting around corners, some admiring, some disbelieving, and some lewd enough to make even a diplomat blush. The more he tried to explain, the more absurd the tales became. In the cafeteria, he overheard a pair of Grawl deckhands solemnly debating whether the human spine could really bend enough to initiate from behind while standing, and one suggested drawing diagrams. Mark fled before they noticed him listening. Yet behind the comedy lay a truth that weighed heavier each day. What had begun as an accident had settled into routine so quickly it startled him, waking to the quiet sound of Lara folding her bedding. Sharing the first cup of tea in silence broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation, walking the corridors together, her calm presence at his shoulder like a silent rebuke to his frantic thoughts. There were moments, small, almost invisible, when her fingers brushed his sleeve or her gaze met his across a crowded hall, and something electric leapt between them. Mark tried to dismiss it as imagination, but the warmth lingered long after the moment passed. The station's council summoned him at last, a chamber carved from black glass that caught and warped every reflection until even his own face looked like a stranger's. Lara stood beside him, back straight, eyes steady. A cluster of elders watched from their hovering seats, skin patterned in the deep azure of high status. Their voices rolled like gravel, echoing through the chamber as they recited ancient clauses Mark could barely follow. When asked to speak, he swallowed the dry air and tried to sound calm, explaining the translator malfunction, the cultural difference, the accident that had sparked all this. His words sounded thin and desperate against the weight of law that had shaped Lara's entire life. At the heart of the questioning lay the taboo neither had spoken aloud, that claiming from behind, as the elders explained in grave tones, was not simply an act of intimacy but the most binding vow tuotheria could make. Reserved not for casual lovers or fleeting dalliances, but for those who intended to share not just bodies but futures. The elder's eyes shimmered with something Mark couldn't read, disapproval, pity, perhaps amusement at human folly. They spoke of precedent and consequence, of cosmic balance and ancestral honor, but what struck deepest was Lara's silence. She stood unmoving, hands folded, gaze locked forward, betraying nothing. Her stillness felt like a wall Mark longed to climb but didn't know how. They left the chamber with no decision rendered. The petition remained under review, the clerk explained blandly, as if their lives were a misfiled document waiting to be stamped. Back in the corridor, Mark turned to speak, to apologize, to say something that might pierce the polite barrier she wore like a second skin, but the words tangled and died on his tongue. Lara met his gaze with a softness so fleeting it hurt, then looked away, and in that tiny movement he heard everything she could not say. The night cycle felt heavier than any before. Mark lay awake, thoughts circling like scavengers over a battlefield of doubts and wants he couldn't name. When sleep finally claimed him, it brought dreams of twin moons over sapphire dunes, and Lara standing there, hand outstretched, asking a question his sleeping mind could never quite hear. He woke to darkness and the quiet rhythm of her breath on the other side of the room, so close yet impossibly far. Morning brought no answers, only more rumors and awkward glances. A human technician asked, in a tone meant to sound casual, whether Lara performed the full bonding rituals, and Mark's glare sent him scurrying away. Lara, ever composed, only tilted her head slightly, amusement and something like affection dancing in her eyes before the mask returned. Even in the absurdity, Mark found himself treasuring those rare flashes of unguarded expression, brief as shooting stars across night sky. Another day, another futile meeting with the elder's clerk. Another string of forms so absurd Mark nearly laughed, declarations of mutual consent, statements of emotional intent, questions so invasive they bordered on parody. Through it all, Lara remained steady, signing each document with elegant strokes, her face unreadable. Mark wanted to ask if it hurt, this endless exposure of private truths to the cold gaze of bureaucracy, but feared the answer might undo them both. One evening, as station lights dimmed and the corridors fell silent, Mark found himself standing at the viewport, staring into the slow spin of stars beyond. Lara joined him, her reflection in the glass a ghostly double beside his own. For a moment, words rose to his lips, questions he had swallowed for too long. Do you resent me? Do you regret this bond? Do you, even now, wish it undone? But the quiet felt too fragile to break. Instead, Lara spoke first, voice low as distant thunder. She confessed that when she first realized what his words had meant, fear had gripped her, not fear of him, but of what the vow represented. A choice stolen by accident, yet binding his bone. Yet in the days that followed, she had seen something in him, a care, an honesty, clumsy but real, that made the thought of unbinding taste strangely bitter. Mark turned, heart pounding harder than in any negotiation. He confessed, haltingly, that the thought of losing her had grown into something he couldn't ignore, that what had started as embarrassment had become something else, something deeper and terrifying. The words hummed between them, heavy and raw, and in that silence Lara's mask slipped. Her smile, faint but unmistakable, curved across her lips, and her eyes, soft, luminous, met his without fear. Neither spoke of love, too soon, too fragile, but something older than words bound them tighter than any cosmic law. And as the station drifted in endless night, Mark realized the bond he feared had become the bond he could no longer imagine breaking. Days blurred into cycles marked by shifting station lights and the steady pulse of bureaucracy grinding slowly toward judgment. Mark Riley, once the picture of human diplomatic composure, now woke each morning with equal parts dread and hope. Dread of the cosmic elder's decree that could unravel the bond before it found its voice, hope that maybe, somehow, the accidental vow might be allowed to stand not by law, but by choice. Lara moved beside him through every corridor, every waiting room, every hushed chamber where clerks scribbled and elders debated. Her silence no longer felt like distance, but a quiet thread of certainty that steadied him more than words could. They spoke less of unbinding now, as though the very thought had begun to sour in their mouths. Rumors on the station reached fever pitch, spilling into official reports and even drifting across trade channels. Some claimed the human had used ancient magic to claim an Otherii noble maid, others whispered he had stumbled into a ritual so sacred its violation might bring cosmic retribution. Mark overheard them all, each story more absurd than the last, and found himself almost amused, because even the wildest rumors couldn't capture the simple truth, that the bond had become something neither accident nor law could fully explain. At last, the council summoned them for final judgment. The chamber felt colder this time, the dark glass swallowing reflections into endless shadow. The elders, draped in ceremonial robes the color of midnight tide, fixed them with eyes as old as the dunes Lara once described. They spoke of law and custom, of intent weighed against accident, of the sanctity of the behind claim, a vow so profound in Otherii culture it transcended even spoken consent if the gesture aligned with sacred tradition. Mark stood with sweat gathering under his collar, words rehearsed 100 times dissolving into nothing under that ancient gaze. The eldest of them spoke directly to Lara first, asking if she wished to be freed. Her answer came soft but unwavering, a single word that echoed through the chamber, no. They turned to Mark, demanding if he would accept the consequences of a claim that bound them until death. His voice, though hoarse, found unexpected strength. Yes, he answered. Yes, not from ignorance or duty, but from the simple truth that the thought of unbinding felt emptier than any exile. The elders conferred in murmurs so low they barely rippled the still air. Seconds stretched into minutes until the eldest raised a hand. The petition for unbinding, they declared, was denied. By custom, the bond stood. The law had been fulfilled by accident, yet held by intent, and no power in council or cosmos would sever what both now chose to keep. The words settled like dawn breaking over dark seas. Mark barely heard the formal dismissal, barely registered the hush that followed as they left the chamber together. Outside, the corridor lay quiet and endless, a single strip of light guiding them forward. Lara stopped, turning to him fully for the first time since that night of confession. Her silver eyes shimmered not with ceremony, but with the raw, wordless relief of shared decision. Mark stepped closer, close enough to see the faint freckles across her cheekbones, the gentle quirk of her lips that had haunted his dreams. They stood there, not speaking, because nothing needed to be said. What began as an accident had become a choice as deliberate as any vow spoken by priests or signed in ancient ink. In the days that followed, the station's rumor mill found new stories to chew, but some still watched them with knowing smiles. The cosmic clerk, once so coldly efficient, offered them a congratulatory nod, as if acknowledging that cosmic law had simply uncovered what neither had dared name. Mark found himself laughing more often, even when Lara teased him gently in private, her dry humor surfacing now that formality had given way to something warmer. At night, they shared not just words but quiet spaces, two beings bruised by mistake and healed by honesty. Their quarters felt less like a cage and more like a shared refuge, walls bearing witness to soft conversations that stretched into the station's artificial dawn. Mark discovered the melody of her laughter, low and surprised, as if it startled even her. Lara, in turn, found the clumsy earnestness beneath his practiced diplomatic calm. When sleep came, it came side by side, not from law's demand but from the quiet certainty that neither wished the bond broken. Weeks slipped into the rhythm of something new and unnamed. Mark still negotiated with stubborn traitors, still tangled in station politics, but each victory and setback carried a different weight now, measured against the simple grace of returning to shared quarters where Lara waited, not from duty, but from desire. In small gestures, a hand brushing his when they passed through narrow doors, the softening of her voice when she spoke his name, Mark felt the slow unfolding of something deeper than obligation. One evening, as they stood before the viewport, the stars wheeling silent and ancient beyond the glass, Lara turned and spoke without prelude. In the old tongue of her people, she offered a vow not demanded by law, a promise to remain not because she must, but because she wished. Mark, his voice unsteady but certain, answered in kind, words stumbling but true. Their foreheads touched, a brief meeting of warmth and breath that spoke louder than ceremony ever could. And somewhere beyond the station's hull, the cosmos continued its quiet dance, indifferent to accidents and choices alike. Yet within the small orbit of two souls tangled by chance and kept by will, something stubbornly human had taken root, the conviction that sometimes the truest vows are those spoken after mistake, forged not in certainty, but in the raw courage of admitting what the heart already knew. The stars watched in silence, and for the first time since the day he entered his alien Maid from behind, Mark Riley felt the shape of his future not as punishment or comedy, but as a gift stumbled into by cosmic accident and kept, stubbornly and joyfully, by human choice.